Hi, my name is Kietzke, and today I'm going to show you how to export data from the Integrated Environmental Control Model, or IECM. There are a couple of reasons why you might want to export data. First, you might want to access the session information without having to run the IECM again. You might want to view it on a different computer, use it in another program such as Excel, send it to a colleague, or use it in a paper or document. Second, you might want to keep your original session data after the IECM has been updated. IECM updates often include adjustments to calculations to reflect more recent data. This may affect the results you get from your session. If you want to be able to go back and review your original data, you will need to export a copy of it. We assume that you already know how to create, navigate, and save sessions. If not, please view our Getting Started video. Let's get started. First, we need to create a plant to demonstrate the export commands. Let's look at a pulverized coal plant. We'll call it Export. We'll choose the typical NSPS configuration. Next, we go to Set Parameters, which is where you'll enter all the input data you want to export. To save time, I'm only going to change one parameter value, then accept all the IECM defaults. Since we're recording this in Pittsburgh, on the Overall Plant tab, under Performance, we'll set the relative humidity to Pittsburgh's annual average of 73%. The export commands that we're going to look at are in the File menu under Export. We can export changed parameters, results, and samples. The Export Samples command is related to the use of the uncertainty editor, which is covered in a separate video. This command allows you to see the effects of any uncertainty that you've added. It is not covered in this video, but its output is very similar to the other export commands. In this video, we will look at the other three commands, which allow us to export changed parameters, all parameters, and results. Let's start by looking at the Export Parameters command. This command exports all of the IECM input parameters. We recommend that you use this for any session that is particularly important, such as one that you've used in a paper or report. Running this command brings up a standard save dialog, which should be familiar to you from other programs that you've used. Let's put the file on the desktop and call it Parameters. If we go to the desktop and double-click the file to open it, we see that we have lots of information. However, there is a slight problem. The formatting looks a little awkward, and there is no way to select a single column. That is because this file, and the files produced by the other export commands, were designed to be viewed in a spreadsheet. They are in a format known as tab-separated text. This format works very well in a spreadsheet, but as you can see, it doesn't always look so good in a text editor like Notepad. So, before we go any farther, let's get this into a spreadsheet. We start by selecting all the text. Then, we copy the text. Next, we open a spreadsheet. In this case, I'm using Microsoft Excel 2007. We click on the cell in the upper left corner of the area we want to paste into, and we paste the text. Some spreadsheets may pop up a window at this point asking you about the format of the text. If yours does that, tell it that the text is tab delimited or tab separated. Once we've pasted in the text, we double-click on the column boundaries to adjust the columns to accommodate the width of the text. Now that we have our file in a more usable format, let's take a look at it. The first section gives us the name, plant type, and date of our session. Next, we see the configuration that we selected on the Configure Plant screen. Next, we find some additional information. Beginning around line 20, we have Input Tools, Result Tools, and Uncertainty Tools. These are part of the configuration input data, but they're not displayed on the main Configure Plant screen. Instead, you can find them under the View menu at the top of the screen. If I select the Unit Tools dialog, I see the first set of input tools and result tools that were displayed in the spreadsheet. These tools set the units for all of the input parameters and all of the IECM results. The next two items in the spreadsheet, called Year Costs Reported and Constant or Current Dollars, are not part of the Unit Tools dialog. These values are set on the Overall Plant Financing parameter screen. However, they are reported here because of their global effect on the results. You'll also notice that the spreadsheet reports all possible values for these parameters. These values appear for technical reasons, but if you're copying this information into a report, you can safely ignore these lines. The next section shows Uncertainty Tools. These correspond to the various options you can select on the Uncertainty Tools dialog located under the View menu in the IECM. Uncertainty is beyond the scope of this video, so we'll skip over this section. The next section contains fuel properties. This tells us which fuel we've chosen. It also tells us the composition. This comes from the Fuel Parameter tab in the IECM. The last and biggest section is labeled Input Screens. This section contains all of the data on all of the screens under the Set Parameters tabs in the IECM. There is a lot of information here. We're going to take a closer look at just a few of the parameters so you can see how the contents of this file correspond with what you see in the interface. Technology, Overall Plant. This refers to the Overall Plant tab, which is the first tab under Set Parameters in the IECM. You'll notice that at the bottom there are several additional tabs under this tab. The first one is Diagram, which is a special case. It does not appear in this section of the spreadsheet since all of the data on it is reported earlier. We'll move on to the Performance bottom tab. Now we see a drop-down menu called Process Type in the lower left part of the screen. It says Process Type 1 Overall Plant, which is the wording reported in the spreadsheet. In this case, there is only one process type, so it's grayed out, but in other areas of the power plant there are multiple process types, each of which has additional tabs with data that are reported. We are currently looking at the Performance bottom tab. This is indicated in the spreadsheet where it says Tab Performance. Each screen contains a list of parameters. In the spreadsheet, they are in the same order as they appear in the interface. Blank lines are not included. Looking at the first parameter, gross electrical output, we have the current value, 650, and we see that it has been calculated by the model. The default, minimum, and maximum values are reported. And we see the current uncertainty, none, and the default uncertainty, also none. We see that this parameter is read-only, which means that it is grayed out in the interface. The next entry isn't really a parameter, it's just the note appearing in the interface telling us where we can set the previous parameter value. Looking at the capacity factor, which is the next parameter, most of the information is similar to what we've already seen. There is an additional line here that says Range Enforced. For most parameters, the minimum and maximum are advisory. The interface will warn you if you enter a value outside that range, but it will allow you to use it. In this case, the interface will not allow you to use a value outside the range. Let's look at one final parameter, Constant or Current Dollars, on the Overall Plant Financing screen. This parameter has a drop-down menu which allows us to choose a value. If we search for this parameter in our spreadsheet, we see that it includes a list of possible values. The text is what appears in the drop-down menu. The numeric values are what is actually being saved. The only time we would need to be concerned about these numbers is if we were trying to put uncertainty on the parameter or graph it. Most of the time, the numeric values can be ignored. I won't go through the rest of this spreadsheet since it's almost 3,000 rows long, but that's what you'll get when you export all of the IECM input parameters. Now I go back to the File menu and look at the first command in the Export menu. Export changed parameters. This command exports everything in the current session, whether saved or not, that is different from the IECM default value. Note that we are comparing with the IECM default, not your own last save. We'll run this command and call the file changes. Let's take a quick look at this file. It's very similar to the file containing all the parameters, but it's much shorter. You see a section called Non-Default Settings, which tells us that we've chosen a typical NSPS plant and shows us the plant configuration changes that occurred when we did that. The last section is Non-Default Variables, which shows us the changed parameters. In this case, the only parameter we changed was the relative humidity. We can see that the current value is 73, and the default value is 50. Now that you know how to export the input parameters, let's consider the third command in the Export menu, Export Results. We'll run this and call our file Results. Exporting results is similar to exporting the input parameters, but the output is a little more complicated due to the structure of the screens. Input screens consist of a list of parameters, one per line. Result screens may be organized into multiple tables or multiple columns or a diagram. I've copied the file into a spreadsheet as I did before, but this file has a lot more columns, so to save time, I'm going to adjust all the column widths at once. I select the whole spreadsheet by clicking in the upper left corner. Then, in the Cells group, under the Format menu, I select Auto Fit Column Width. Note that different spreadsheets and versions may show these commands in slightly different places. This gives us a very wide spreadsheet, since a few of the tables have a lot of columns. If you're familiar with spreadsheets, you can set narrower columns, then use the wrap text command to display the headings on multiple lines, but we won't do that here. The first part of this file looks very similar to the parameters file. All of the configuration information is included except for the input units. The output screens section is similar to the input screen section of the parameters file, except that only the title, units, and value are shown. Let's take a look at the different types of output screens and see how they are represented in this file. Let's start by looking at the overall plant performance screen, which has multiple tables. We'll locate this screen in the results file using our spreadsheet search function. We want to search for something that is likely to be unique. Let's use net electrical output. A quick look at the surrounding area confirms that we have found the correct data for the screen. Looking at this screen in the IECM, we see that there are two tables, one on the left showing plant performance results, and one on the right showing plant power results. Going back to our file, we see that the table on the left is reported in its entirety, followed by the table on the right. The first line contains the column headers. The remaining lines contain the contents of the table. Blank lines are omitted. If we skip next in the IECM to bottom tab 4, Solids In Out, we'll see a different format for tables. This is a single table with multiple columns. We can locate this data in our results by searching the spreadsheet for solid components. This looks like the right place, and if we scroll up a bit, we can verify that this is the data from the overall plant solids in out screen. As before, we see that the first line contains the column headers. Subsequent lines contain the contents of the IECM table in the same order that is displayed on the screen. This looks fairly straightforward in the spreadsheet. However, if you're thinking about skipping the step of bringing it into a spreadsheet, note that this type of screen is very difficult to read in a standard text editor. In the IECM, some numerical results are displayed in diagrams rather than tables. Let's look for the base plant diagram, which is the first bottom tab under base plant. Diagrams can be more difficult to search for since they tend to rely on the background picture for context, and the titles tend to be less unique. Dry bottom ash is probably going to be fairly unique, so we'll search for that. Looking up, we can see that this is the data we're looking for. Going back to the IECM, while it may not be obvious, each diagram in the results section includes up to 18 rows and 3 columns of numerical results. This diagram uses all of the columns. We have some values on the left, one in the middle, and some on the right. The values in the result file are ordered by row and by column within each row. As an example, let's consider the order for this screen. The first row contains ash entering flue gas. The next row contains mercury removal. The next row contains boiler makeup and temperature out. Then flue gas out, cooling water, fly ash out, mercury out, etc. In some cases, the titles used in the result file are slightly longer and more descriptive to help provide some of the context that is lost without the background picture. For example, on this screen where the title just says temperature, the title in the result file says heated air temp. This generally does not interfere with searching, but it is something that you should be aware of. This concludes our video on exporting data from the IECM. We hope you found it helpful.